Mm-hmm. 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 Good morning. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes. What was a real blessing is how, and I always find this, the Word of God always, it's interconnected like this most mind-blowing web with all the different attaching strings and points. And that said, teaching out of Colossians 3 last night, that was a good little study. And we spent some time on being eternally minded, to have an eternal mindset, to set our minds above in heaven. And it was a great follow-up to the morning message, just about, keeping the coming of Jesus at mind, that we need to be actively engaged in serving the Lord because we don't know how much time we have. But I also, I mentioned Colossians 3:2. I think it's verse 2. Set your mind on things above and not on the things of the earth. And we mentioned again how in Ecclesiastes, the phrase under the sun shows up 27 times because that's the theme of this book. And like often, we started a new book, Ecclesiastes, and I just keep reminding the theme, because if you know the theme of the book, it's going to help you interpret the book. And I've said that recently on Facebook concerning other books. One in particular that just caught my eye recently is the book of Hebrews, because it was a book, unlike pretty much all the other epistles. Oh, I got CDs. Oh. I slept in. Needed some extra rest today. So, the book of Hebrews, though, it was written to Jewish believers. And it's not just like Matthew. Matthew wrote to Jews, which is why Matthew says it is written all the time, because he knew that his readers knew what was written, so he was always making reference to it. But Hebrews was written to Jewish believers. There we go. That's what I need to get rid of. Jewish believers that were struggling in their faith and were considering to return back to Judaism, because being a Christian brought a lot of persecution, and can't we just go back to being Jewish? And imagine if you were a faithful Jew. Imagine this isn't like, someone getting saved out of the gutter. This is a faithful Jewish person who loved Yahweh, who loved Adonai, and they got saved. This is totally not Ecclesiastes, but we're going to work our way backwards. Rabbit trails. But they loved the Lord. But then they met their Messiah, and they willingly received him because it was Jesus. They knew their Messiah when he came. But all of a sudden, becoming a Christian means persecution. It means I lost my business because the Jews ran me out of town. I can't send my kids to school because they're being picked on. And it's created so much of a problem in our lives. Why don't we just go back to being Jewish again? I mean, I'm worshiping the same God. This isn't like you're converting from atheism or Islam, right? It's like, and it makes sense in the head of a Jew. I mean, I could imagine, right? Like, can we just go back to being Jewish? Worshiping the same God, and then I won't get picked on so much. And that's where Paul tells them, after you receive the knowledge of the truth, there's no more sacrifice for sins. It's this idea of, once you have heard of Christ, the sacrificial system, you can't go back to that. It was efficacious. It actually worked for Jews who had not yet heard of Jesus. But the moment you heard the truth, there was no going back. So that helps you interpret Hebrews, a book with some very confusing passages. Ecclesiastes can be a very confusing book because this guy seems to be whining all the time, and he seems like just saying like what's the point in life? Like it's almost a depressing book. But as we continue through Ecclesiastes, we remember that at the very end of the book, Solomon says, I should almost quote it every single time, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. And he calls that the conclusion of the whole matter. So, okay, we're going to continue and just finish chapter 1 here. It's short, so I spent my time talking about other things. But that's the idea. Paul is looking back. And good morning, all you guys are saying good morning, and I'm so busy talking, I haven't said hi back. But he's looking back. Solomon's looking back. And he chased after wisdom. And he chased after knowledge. He became the most knowledgeable, wise man on the planet. And yet, he still felt empty. So he chased after sex. And he felt empty. He chased after experience and wealth. Different highs. But he still felt empty. And that's why he says everything's just vanity. So here in starting verse 12, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Ecclesiastes 1:12. And he says, I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of men by which they may be exercised. In the sense of that God has given us the ability to go and do all these things. We have freedom. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. I put in my Bible next to that, without God. That's true. Without God, you can't do that, but with God, all things are possible. Now, I communed with my heart, saying, look, and actually, I'll be real quick, what is crooked can't be straightened. Right? The idea there is, and if you've ever tried to straighten a paper clip, maybe you remember doing that in elementary school like I do, but you get a paper clip and you want to make it absolutely straight. But the problem is that metal, once you bend it, it's actually hardened. By taking metal and bending it, there's actually a metallurgical process of hardening that takes place. Which is why it's funny, but you probably know what I'm saying if you've done this. You bend the paper clip and you bend it back, and that little spot you bent, I could bend the rest of the paper clip easy, but that bent spot is actually really hard now. There's actually a process that took place, and it has physically been hardened. It is now harder metal than it was before. All right, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have attained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart is understand knowledge. Wisdom and great and knowledge. And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also grasping at the wind. And so he says, madness and folly even. Like I tried foolish things. I looked at the fools were doing and I went and tried that. So that's what I mean. He went and tried everything. For in much wisdom is much grief. And he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Have you ever heard the saying, ignorance is bliss? I think that's what he's talking about here. He's saying that I thought that if I had more wisdom and more knowledge, everything would be better. But in fact, actually, in some ways, it just made everything worse. And this is not telling us to not get wisdom and not get knowledge, right? This would contradict Solomon. This is kind of a funny loop. Solomon, who is the wisest man to ever live, told us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. With all thy getting, get wisdom, right? These are the words of Solomon's Proverbs, that we should get wisdom and knowledge. But Solomon, who's the wisest man to ever live, also said that in much wisdom is grief, and he increases knowledge, increases sorrow. Okay, Solomon, what is it now? Well, that's the thing. The Proverbs are instructions. This is not an instructive book. It is him sharing with us this experience he had and how when he thought that he could have fulfillment. You see, when you seek fulfillment from anywhere but God, you will feel empty in the end. And that's the thing, is that maybe you never thought, if I just chase enough knowledge, I'll finally feel good. That today, that's not really popular. But I know that many of us, whether we like to talk about it publicly or not, but we've experienced, that, more sex, more girls, more guys, more what, well, yeah, and, this will make me, a different experience, something you've seen that you should have never seen in the first place. And maybe if I did, that would be so amazing. And then, no, I need something else, something different. This is how people get into really crazy and horrific sexual things, is because they keep chasing a greater experience, but at the end they're still empty, wanting something more. And it's the same with money. It's funny too, because some of you people are like retirement age, or or close. Steve, you're like part retired, you're retired. And it's just funny because I'm sure if Steve went back and thought about, what did you think was a lot of money when you were 16, right? And then you go like, oh yeah. And then like, what did I think, at age 40? And then what did I think, that's the thing, is that we always see and we think, oh man, if I could have that much money, right? Yeah. I knew you were working part-time when you and Diane were first dating. And I was like, I'm pretty sure you're fully retired now. Yeah, I knew that. I'm just talking out loud before thinking. I'm talking before I'm thinking. But anyway, yeah, I could just imagine, right? It's like when you were a teenager, what you thought was a lot of money. Here's a fun one. When I won $10,000 in 2012 for this competition I did, my students, my homeroom kids, heard about it. And they asked me, Mister, are you going to retire? I told them, you bet I am. Right after I buy my Ferrari. Because in their minds, $10,000 was like the biggest number in the world. And now that they all are in their mid to late 20s and have spouses and jobs and kids, they would gladly take $10,000. But they realize how little that is in the grand scheme of things. So Solomon, that's what he's saying here with wisdom and knowledge. I want to read to you guys, and then I'll be done. But 1 Kings, this is good. In verse 16 there, it says, I gain more wisdom than all. 1 Kings chapter 4, and we'll kind of conclude there. But it's just a good illustration for us. 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29 to 34. It says, and God gave Solomon wisdom. So it wasn't, God did this. It's not wrong to get wisdom. And exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart, like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all men of the East and all wisdom of Egypt. And so, remember, those Egyptians built the temples, the pyramids. The pyramids of Giza were already there at this time. They were smart peoples. and so, again, here, Solomon's not boasting when he said, I was the wisest, because here's God saying that he was the wisest. He was wiser than all the men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, than Heman, Shalchol, Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame and all the surrounding, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and we have 600 of his proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. We only have one of his songs. We're going to get the Song of Solomon next. He spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke of animals, of birds, of creeping things, of fish. And men of all nations, from all kings of the earth, who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And so again, we're going to get to the vanity of pleasure tomorrow. But this was the vanity of wisdom. And maybe this is an encouraging closing note for you guys. I want you guys to keep growing in your knowledge of the Word of God. But a lesson we learned from Ecclesiastes is not to set up false milestones, false expectations that we're ever going to arrive. That's why Solomon felt so empty, because he thought through any one of these avenues, he would eventually arrive at this place where he felt like he arrived. And what I can tell you is that a lot of these books behind me I've read, not all of them, and not all the way through some of them, right? But I've read a lot out of these books. And they're all written by men who know a whole lot more than I do. And the more I study, quite often it just opens up and makes you realize how much more there is to know. And also it reminds you that you're called to different things. Some of these guys are geniuses on one book of the Bible. You know, they can tell you all about one book of the Bible. And it's, you know, that reminder for me, it's like, oh, I wish I knew as much as this guy on this one book of the Bible, you know, but it's like, but that's not my job in life. God's called me to be a pastor. I'm more of a jack of all trades of the Bible. I know a good amount, a healthy amount about lots of things. Rather than being an expert in one, I know a little bit about everything because I'm usually having to address everything. And so kind of just remembering that God has given you the gifts. God has given you the natural abilities. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and I set you apart. I sanctified her. I called you to be ... He tells Jeremiah his calling, but you could say the same thing about you. You do have a purpose, and God has given you natural and supernatural, by the Spirit, gifts, talents to use, and he gave you just enough. In fact, he gave you more than enough to accomplish the purpose he made you for. So don't worry about chasing for more. You'll have enough. Make sure to study. We read that into Timothy, that to study to show yourself worthy. A worker who needs not to be ashamed, who can rightly divide the word of truth. So this doesn't mean you just kick back and be like, God will give me it if I need it. No. You work out your own salvation in fear and trembling, and then God will also be being the one who's working in you to will to do for his good pleasure. It's a team effort here. So, all right, God bless you guys. Have a great Monday. Men's Bible study tonight for you men. And I will see you guys. No women's study this week, right? And then, but there still is youth. And then we've got Thanksgiving. So, all right, God bless you guys. Have a great day, and I will see you guys around.